Kim Jong Un's new luxury train shocks the entire world. Not because a dictator built a rolling palace, but because he built it in a country where millions face starvation while he travels in bulletproof carriages with wine cellars that cost more than entire villages will see in a generation. To understand how that level of control is even possible, we first need to look at how Kim Jong Un secretly travels, and it starts with the reason he refuses to fly. 10. Inherited paranoia. Kim Jong Un doesn't fly. Not regularly, not for long distances, not unless absolutely necessary. And the reason traces back to a single catastrophic event that shaped an entire dynasty's approach to air travel. In 1976, a Soviet-built aircraft carrying North Korean officials crashed, killing over 30 people in one of the deadliest incidents in the country's aviation history. Among the dead were senior party members, military commanders, and government officials. An entire generation of leadership wiped out in seconds. Kim Jong-il, who would later become North Korea's second supreme leader, reportedly witnessed the aftermath and developed a pathological fear of flying that never left him. The fear didn't die with the Soviet Union, it just got a new passport. Kim Jong-il famously traveled almost exclusively by train throughout his decades in power, taking multi-day rail journeys across Russia and China rather than boarding aircraft for trips that would take hours. His 2001 trip to Moscow took 6 days by train. His 2011 journey to Russia covered thousands of miles on rails when a flight would have been a fraction of the time. And when Kim Jong Un inherited power in 2011, he inherited the paranoia along with the title. North Korea's fleet of aging Soviet-era aircraft didn't inspire confidence. Maintenance standards were questionable. Spare parts came from sanction-evading smuggling networks. The idea of trusting your life to a decades-old Ilyushin jet maintained by technicians working with limited resources became a risk calculation that consistently favored trains. But there's another factor beyond mechanical fear: control. In an aircraft, you're dependent on pilots, mechanics, air traffic systems, and variables Kim can't personally oversee. On a train, he controls the route, the speed, the stops, and can deploy security measures that are impossible at 30,000 feet. But even this extreme level of caution was about to be amplified by a deception so elaborate that South Korean intelligence agencies would spend millions trying to answer a question that should be simple. Which train is he actually on? 9. The ghost convoy. When Kim Jong Un travels by train, North Korea doesn't just send one, they send 3, sometimes 4. All identical, all departing within hours of each other, all following different routes to the same general destination. 3 trains, 1 dictator, 0 confirmations. South Korean intelligence agencies monitor rail traffic along the North Korean network constantly, using satellites, informants, and signal intercepts to track leadership movements. And every time Kim travels, they face the same problem: multiple trains matching the profile of his armored convoy moving simultaneously, making it impossible to confirm which one actually carries him until he arrives at his destination. The decoy system isn't just about confusion. It's about multiplication of risk for anyone planning an attack. If you're an intelligence agency trying to track Kim's location, you now need to monitor 3 separate trains across 3 different routes. If you're a hostile actor planning sabotage, you need to somehow strike all 3 trains simultaneously, or risk hitting a decoy while the real target escapes. And the trains don't just run parallel routes. They diverge, converge, stop at different stations, sometimes reverse direction entirely. The operational complexity makes tracking not just difficult, but functionally impossible without assets physically inside each train, and North Korea's security apparatus ensures that's not happening. If South Korea can't track him, China can't either. That's not security, that's statecraft. The psychological impact extends beyond intelligence agencies. When your enemy can't reliably locate you during transit, they can't plan around your movements. When neighboring countries can't predict your travel, they can't prepare diplomatic responses. The decoy system transforms a simple train journey into strategic ambiguity on rails. But running multiple identical trains creates its own engineering nightmare. Because when each train weighs enough to crush normal tracks, you need infrastructure that can handle something closer to a military convoy than passenger service. 8. Rolling fortress. Kim Jong Un's train carriages weigh approximately 90 tons each. That's 3 times heavier than a standard passenger rail car, and the reason is simple. Every surface that matters is bulletproof. Bulletproof carriages sound impressive until you need 3 locomotives to pull them. The train isn't just armored, it's engineered to survive scenarios most passenger rail never considers. The undercarriage is reinforced to withstand bomb blasts from explosives planted on tracks. The windows are multi-layered ballistic glass thick enough to stop rifle rounds. The walls are steel-plated with composite shielding designed to deflect shrapnel and projectiles. But all that protection creates a physics problem. Standard locomotives struggle to pull the weight. Normal tracks can't handle the stress without reinforcement. Curves and inclines that wouldn't challenge regular trains become operational hazards when you're hauling what amounts to a mobile bunker. North Korea has had to reinforce sections of track specifically for Kim's travel routes, upgrading rail infrastructure that in some areas dates back to Japanese colonial occupation. The train moves slower than commercial service because speed plus weight equals derailment risk. Reports suggest Kim's train averages 37 miles per hour during travel, roughly half the speed of normal passenger service and a fraction of what modern high-speed rail achieves. 90 tons per carriage, roughly 60 sedans compressed into one train car. And it's not just one armored carriage. The entire convoy includes command cars, communications cars, security cars, and the luxury carriage where Kim actually travels. Each one built to the same bulletproof standard. Each one adds weight that requires more locomotives, more fuel, more track reinforcement. The result is a train that can theoretically survive an assassination attempt, but moves so slowly that exposure time during travel increases dramatically. Which is exactly why the security measures surrounding each journey start to resemble a military occupation of North Korea's own. Infrastructure. 7. Champagne and starvation. Inside Kim Jong Un's armored train is a world that exists in deliberate opposition to the country outside. Conference rooms with leather seating, satellite communication systems that allow secure calls to anywhere on Earth, large flat-screen televisions. And, according to defector accounts and intelligence reports, a wine cellar stocked with French bottles cost more per case than most North Korean families earn in a year. French wine at 60 mf while the nation rations rice. Priorities. The luxury isn't accidental or merely personal preference. It serves a propaganda function for the small circle of elites who travel with Kim or hear about the train's amenities. The message is clear. The supreme leader lives above scarcity, untouched by the economic pressures crushing ordinary citizens. That separation reinforces the mythology of leadership, that Kim exists on a different plane, deserving of luxuries the population can't imagine. But the contrast is staggering when contextualized. The cost to outfit one luxury train carriage with satellite systems, conference facilities, and imported furnishings is estimated to equal feeding 10,000 North Koreans for a year. And Kim doesn't just have one luxury carriage. He has multiple, spread across different trains to maintain the decoy system. Professional excess isn't just tolerated in North Korea's leadership culture. It's expected. The train features sleeping quarters with custom bedding, private bathrooms with imported fixtures, and dining areas where chefs prepare meals using ingredients smuggled through sanctions or imported via Chinese intermediaries. While North Korean state media shows citizens receiving reduced rations and UN reports document malnutrition rates climbing, Kim's train staff maintains a mobile luxury hotel that moves across a country where electricity is intermittent and food security is a daily crisis for millions. The train doesn't just transport Kim. It transports the illusion that North Korea's leadership exists in a separate reality, one where scarcity is a problem for other people. But luxury only works if you survive the journey, which is why every route Kim travels gets treated like a military operation, where speed is sacrificed entirely for control. 6. The slow road. In 2018, Kim Jong Un traveled to Singapore for a summit with President Donald Trump. The distance from Pyongyang to Singapore is roughly 2,800 miles. A direct flight takes approximately 5 hours. Kim's train journey took over 65 hours. Yes, he actually traveled 3 days for a meeting that lasted 4 hours. The route went north through North Korea, across the Chinese border, then south through China to the Vietnamese border, where Kim switched to a motorcade for the final leg. The entire journey required pre-inspecting every meter of track, closing train stations along the route, and coordinating with Chinese authorities to ensure security at every stop. Paranoia doesn't save time. It eliminates variables. Every station Kim's train passed was shut down hours in advance. Passengers were cleared. Platforms were swept for explosives. Security personnel were stationed at intervals along the tracks. The train moved at reduced speed through populated areas and stopped periodically for security checks that added hours to an already extended journey. The 2019 trip to Hanoi for the second Trump summit followed a similar pattern. Thousands of miles by rail when a flight would have covered the distance in a fraction of the time. Kim's train crossed into China, traveled south for days, then switched to road convoy for the final approach into Vietnam. The operational cost was staggering. Fuel, security, coordination with foreign governments, track closures that disrupted commercial and freight service, all to avoid a 5-hour flight. But for Kim, the calculation isn't about efficiency. It's about survival. And survival means controlling every variable, even if it turns a short trip into a multi-day expedition that exposes him to risk for longer than flying ever would. 5. The kill zone. The train itself is just the center of a much larger security operation. Every journey Kim makes by rail involves over 100 security personnel spread across multiple carriages, advanced scout teams that travel the route hours before the actual convoy, and communications officers monitoring threats in real time. When your commute requires anti-drone jamming, it's not travel. It's a tactical deployment. The security convoy starts before Kim's train even leaves the station. Advanced teams inspect every meter of track, checking for explosives, structural damage, or sabotage. They examine bridges, tunnels, switching stations, any point where an attack could disable or derail the train. These inspections can take days for longer routes, with teams working around the clock to clear the path. Once the train is moving, the security operation expands. Armed guards are stationed in every carriage, not just the ones carrying Kim. Communications officers maintain encrypted radio contact with security forces along the route and with command centers in Pyongyang. Intelligence officers monitor for threats, drones, aircraft, vehicle movements near the tracks, anything that could indicate an attack. Professional paranoia isn't a mindset. It's an operational doctrine. Recent reports suggest North Korea has installed anti-drone jamming equipment on Kim's trains, responding to the proliferation of small commercial drones that could be weaponized for reconnaissance or attack. The systems create electromagnetic interference that disrupts drone communications and navigation, essentially creating a no-fly bubble around the train. But all this security creates exposure time. The longer Kim is in transit, the more opportunities exist for something to go wrong. A 3-day train journey means 3 days of active threat monitoring, 3 days of requiring perfect execution from hundreds of security personnel, 3 days where a single mistake could be catastrophic. Which is why international travel amplifies every risk factor, because now Kim isn't just trusting his own security forces, he's trusting foreign infrastructure he doesn't control. 4. The borrowed locomotive. When Kim Jong Un travels internationally by train, the operational complexity multiplies because he's no longer operating on infrastructure his government controls. Foreign tracks. Foreign security. Foreign variables that North Korean paranoia can't fully eliminate. The 2018 and 2019 summit trips exposed just how dependent North Korea is on Chinese cooperation for Kim's rail travel. The trains had to cross into China, travel thousands of miles through Chinese territory, and rely on Chinese rail infrastructure that North Korea can inspect, but not control. Chinese authorities coordinated security, but that meant trusting Beijing's assurances that routes were safe and tracks were clear. And then came the breakdown. During the 2019 trip to Hanoi for the second Trump summit, Kim's train experienced mechanical issues in China that required a Chinese diesel locomotive to replace one of the North Korean engines. The failure forced an unscheduled stop, delayed the journey, and created exactly the kind of unpredictable situation Kim's security protocols are designed to avoid. Nothing says nuclear power like borrowing your neighbor's locomotive mid-summit. The incident was embarrassing on multiple levels. It exposed the limitations of North Korea's aging rail equipment. It demonstrated that even with extensive pre-trip inspections, mechanical failures can happen, and it revealed Kim's dependency on Chinese assistance for international travel. A dependency that gives Beijing leverage Kim would prefer not to acknowledge. The Hanoi trip covered over 2,800 miles by rail, when a direct flight would have been roughly 8,800 miles, adding an extra 1,000 miles of travel just to avoid flying. The journey took more than 60 hours each way, meaning Kim spent over 5 days in transit for a summit that collapsed without agreement after just 2 days of meetings. 5 days of travel, 2 days of failed negotiations, 0 agreements signed. But the logistical nightmare wasn't just about distance. Every time Kim's train crossed a border, security protocols had to be renegotiated. Every time it stopped for fuel or maintenance, new vulnerabilities emerged. Every hour spent on foreign soil was an hour where North Korean security forces couldn't guarantee total control. International train travel turns paranoia into a diplomatic liability, because the very allies you need for logistic support are the same governments you don't fully trust. Kim's train summits demonstrated that even dictators with elaborate security measures can't escape the fundamental problem of traveling through someone else's territory. You're always, to some degree, at their mercy, which is why, when Kim travels domestically and needs speed, he occasionally abandons trains entirely for something even more excessive. 3. 100-car procession. When Kim Jong Un travels by road domestically, the result is less motorcade and more military convoy. Over 100 vehicles. Highway shutdowns that last hours. Decoy convoys running simultaneously on parallel routes. The entire operation shuts down transportation networks across regions just to move one person from one city to another. Highway closures aren't inconveniences, they're state policy. The motorcade includes armored limousines, communications vehicles, counter-assault teams, medical units, and support staff spread across enough cars to fill a shopping mall parking lot. Security personnel travel in formations ahead of and behind Kim's actual vehicle, which is itself surrounded by identical decoy limousines to prevent targeting. North Korean state media occasionally releases footage of these motorcades, and the scale is staggering. Vehicles stretch for hundreds of meters, moving in tight formation, with motorcycle escorts clearing intersections and security forces positioned at every overpass and bridge along the route. 100-plus vehicles, more cars than some North Korean towns own combined. But road travel creates exposure problems that trains don't. Highways pass through populated areas where line-of-sight attacks become possible. The operational cost mirrors the train system: fuel, personnel, vehicle maintenance, route security. Except road travel compresses the timeline, meaning security forces have less time to inspect routes and more exposure points to monitor simultaneously. It's faster than trains, but it's also riskier. Which is why, on rare occasions when neither trains nor motorcades will work, Kim faces the option he spent his entire leadership avoiding. 2. The propaganda flights. Kim Jong Un does fly, just rarely, just barely, and only under conditions so controlled they make his train security look relaxed. When he does board an aircraft, it's exclusively North Korean registered planes, typically an aging Ilyushin IL-62 or a slightly newer Tupolev Tu-204. These aren't random choices. They're aircraft North Korea's technicians have maintained for years, using parts sourced through sanction-evading networks, inspected obsessively before every flight. He'll fly for cameras, just not for distance. The flights Kim takes are almost always domestic and short, Pyongyang to coastal cities, or brief hops to industrial sites for propaganda visits that state media broadcasts to demonstrate his connection to the people. The imagery is carefully managed: Kim boarding the aircraft, Kim reviewing documents in flight, Kim arriving to inspect factories or military units. But South Korean intelligence tells a different story. For major travel, especially anything international, Kim consistently chooses trains despite the massive time investment. The 2018 Singapore summit, the 2019 Hanoi meeting, the multiple trips to meet Xi Jinping in China, all done by rail, even when flights would have been faster and arguably less exposed. North Korean TV shows him boarding planes. South Korean intelligence shows him taking trains. The rare flights serve a propaganda function more than a transportation one. They project normalcy, suggesting Kim travels like other world leaders rather than hiding in armored trains for days at a time. They counter narratives about paranoia by showing him confidently boarding aircraft. But the pre-flight protocols betray the actual anxiety. Reports from defectors and intelligence sources suggest Kim's aircraft undergo weeks of inspections before he flies. Every system is tested repeatedly. Mechanics inspect components that were already inspected. Backup aircraft are prepared in case primary planes show any irregularities. And even after all that preparation, Kim still defaults to trains for anything beyond short domestic propaganda trips. The flights exist in a strange space between necessity and performance. He needs to fly occasionally to maintain the image of a modern leader who isn't trapped by inherited fear. But he avoids it enough that the pattern becomes obvious. This is a man who trusts ground transportation in ways he'll never trust aircraft, no matter how many inspections his technicians perform, which makes what he built next even more shocking. Because while the world watched his trains and motorcades, Kim was quietly constructing something that would make all his previous luxuries seem almost restrained. The shock train. In 2024, satellite imagery and defector reports began revealing something that shocked international observers. Kim Jong Un had commissioned a new luxury train, not a refurbishment of his existing fleet. Not an upgrade to aging carriages, an entirely new custom-built train constructed during a period when North Korea was experiencing its worst food shortages in decades. When UN reports documented climbing malnutrition rates, when the country was still reeling from COVID-19 border closures that had devastated what little international trade existed. Starvation is a policy failure. The train is a policy choice. The new train reportedly cost somewhere in the range of millions of dollars, though exact figures remain classified because North Korea doesn't publish budgets for leadership luxuries, and Western intelligence agencies can only estimate based on construction timelines, materials, and comparable projects. But even conservative estimates place the cost at a level that could have fed tens of thousands of North Korean citizens for years. The estimated cost represents over 1,000 lifetimes of earnings for average North Koreans, in a country where the typical annual income hovers around $1,300. While families faced ration cuts and black market food prices spiked beyond what most could afford, resources were diverted to building a mobile palace that would spend most of its time sitting idle in secure rail yards. But the cost isn't what shocks observers most. It's the timing and the features. The new train reportedly includes even more extensive armoring than previous versions, with upgraded ballistic protection and reinforced undercarriages designed to survive larger explosive devices than earlier models could withstand. The weight per carriage has increased, requiring further track reinforcements along routes Kim travels and necessitating more powerful locomotives to pull the enhanced armor. The communications systems have been upgraded to next-generation satellite technology, allowing encrypted connections that previous trains couldn't maintain reliably. Intelligence reports suggest the new train can function as a mobile command center with capabilities rivaling fixed military installations, equipped to coordinate nuclear forces and conventional military operations from anywhere on North Korea's rail network. And then there's the interior. Defector accounts and intelligence assessments describe luxury that exceeds even the already extravagant standards of Kim's previous trains. Expanded conference facilities, enhanced medical suites capable of performing complex surgeries, entertainment systems with large format displays, and, maintaining tradition, an upgraded wine cellar stocked with imported bottles that individually cost more than most North Koreans earn in months. The train has a wine cellar. The country has ration cards. Both facts are true simultaneously. But what makes this train particularly shocking isn't just the contrast between leadership luxury and population suffering. That's been North Korean reality for decades. What shocks observers is that Kim chose to build this during COVID isolation, when North Korea's borders were sealed, when the economy contracted further, when food security reached crisis levels that even state media couldn't fully hide. The decision to construct a new luxury train during national emergency reveals something about North Korea's priority structure that goes beyond typical authoritarian excess. This wasn't maintenance of existing luxury or incremental upgrades to necessary infrastructure. This was a deliberate choice to allocate scarce resources, engineering talent, materials, foreign currency for imported components, toward a project that benefits one person while millions struggle. The construction timeline itself is telling. Reports suggest work began in 2020 or 2021, during the height of North Korea's pandemic border closure, when the country was essentially cut off from the world and internal economic conditions were deteriorating rapidly. Rather than diverting resources toward food distribution, medical infrastructure, or economic stabilization, the leadership prioritized building a train that would be used occasionally for domestic travel and even less frequently for international summits. The new train represents professional paranoia taken to its logical extreme. Each iteration of Kim's armored trains becomes more protective, more isolated, more expensive, as if the level of security required increases with each passing year despite North Korea facing no credible conventional military threats to leadership travel within its own borders. But there's another element that makes this train shocking beyond its cost and timing. It represents continuity of a system where leadership comfort takes absolute priority over population welfare, where the visual and practical separation between the supreme leader and ordinary citizens is not just maintained, but expanded even during crises. The train doesn't just transport Kim. It reinforces the mythology that he exists in a separate category of human experience, untouched by the scarcity affecting everyone else. deserving of resources that could alleviate suffering, but instead go toward marginal improvements in already excessive luxury. And the international community's response has been essentially impotent. Sanctions target North Korea's weapons programs and restrict luxury goods imports. But enforcement is inconsistent, and workarounds exist. China facilitates much of North Korea's access to foreign components and materials, whether deliberately or through inadequate enforcement of its own sanctions commitments. And Kim faces no domestic political accountability, no elections, no free press, no mechanism by which North Koreans suffering from food insecurity can question why resources went toward a luxury train instead of rice distribution. The new luxury train shocks the world not because dictators building excessive transportation is unprecedented, but because it demonstrates that even during documented humanitarian crisis, even under international sanctions designed to pressure leadership, even when the gap between elite and population is visible from satellite imagery, the system continues prioritizing leadership luxury with such brazen indifference that it stops being shocking and starts being routine horror. Kim Jong Un travels in bulletproof carriages with wine cellars, moving slowly across a country where millions face hunger. And the train that shocks the world is just the newest iteration of a pattern that has defined North Korean leadership for generations. The shock isn't that he built it. The shock is that everyone knew he would, and no one could stop him.